presenting here is an extension of research that I've been doing for a few years here in Auckland on what is happening around the problem of consumption. So New Zealand has probably relatively recently, and particularly Australia and also North America in general, have a common form of urbanism that is mainly dominated by large development at low density. And the question, as Victor Gruen firstly probably tried to address, is exactly how we do a workable public space. And how do we manage it in a situation like this one? That's the point that we are seeing now when so many changes have happened that possibly are going to transforming quite radically the way in which we live and conceive these spaces in transition that we have, both in terms of, as we're saying, social changes, but also technology. So I'm presenting a short research that expands on how what we call distributed and participatory creativity, which is essentially what we understand as form of, I can say, an effect of Internet 2.0. So essentially the possibility of being somehow prosumer, as George Ritzer would say, at the same time, how that has to do with a huge dramatic change that we have in these central places of our cities, and I'm getting there in a second to explain in detail what they are, that are going to be somehow cannibalized by themselves. I'm talking about shopping malls. And that are in our city, in these low density cities, and I mentioned Gruen before, the real centers of the every, I can say, real social interactions, call us, found out. Yeah. So what is happening in New Zealand probably is quite important to look at preliminarily how we address that. And the government immediately started to set up a framework drawing upon the experience that immediately brought us to a lockdown. So this lockdown is the one in blue, started very early, as you can see, when we had a very low number of people that were infected. And indeed, the government got a lot of critiques because, as you can imagine, that's of course, what happened is that we were able, in this particular way, to limit the number of dramatic situations that we've seen in many countries in which the health system is completely overwhelmed. And so we went out. Now we have few days with 0 cases in the country. Now, a very strange thing that happened is who actually was. If you look at that, we have a strange situation. Last week, we've heard of the situation from CETA law, the situation of New York and in general, the social disparities creating problems with the spread of the virus. If you look at the data in New Zealand, then you see something quite strange, because what you see is that, let's say, the most fortunate group, I'm looking now at ethnicity, so there's the simple data, but there's plenty of indicators in this direction. As you can see, that 71% of people infected are the European people of the European descent. Keep in mind that in Auckland, the Europeans are about 50%. And the salary, the weekly salary, tells you probably what I'm talking about. The thing about the people infected is that you can see most of them, so 23%, are actually people, young adults, so from 20 to 30 years. So quite young, so very different than in other cases. Again, the spread was concentrated in the only, say, urban area that we have in New Zealand, which is Auckland, where I live. They have the 36% of the cases altogether. So the 3 there are actually urban area divided in 3. What is happening in this urban area where we have these European, young, and urban people? Well, as I told you before, they live in a city in which just the very core has at, how can I say, European density, but actually most of it has a density which is probably lower than 3,000 people. What is happening there? That's an example. So this is a shopping mall, and this is the Auckland plan. The Auckland plan that looks at the future of Auckland in the next 40 years. So actually, it was done in 2010. And what you can see in the middle image, so here, I don't know if you see the pointer, but what you can see here is that the designation of the urban metropolitan area is actually the pure area of the shopping mall, which is the one here. So that's quite worrying. Why is it worrying? Is it worrying because, well, people tend to recognize these places in a very different way as they were in the past, and particularly because also these centers are developing. And indeed, the mall that I showed you before is called Sylvia Park, is not really a traditional shopping mall. Actually, it should change the name because shopping is now not probably the main characteristics. Amazon and whatever are actually growing now with these pandemics in an exponential way. And this is the difference between the old mall and the new mall. And the reason why I'm showing these two is because, well, what I call the new one, I call post-consumerism. Post-consumer not in the sense that we're not consuming, but in a sense that our consumption, as George Ritz mentioned before, said, is becoming partially production. And when we consume in a way, we also produce, or we are prosumer that sometimes produce and sometimes. So in this particular way, these particular users were particularly affected are the ones that are actually the most active on social media. And what is happening is that in my studies, I tend to use Instagram. Why Instagram? Well, simply because of the fact that it is based on visual elements. And this being based on visual elements allows us to understand a bit more about the perception representation of the city. So the image of the city becomes quite and crucially represented in these places, but probably even more importantly is the way in which people relate to other people and create networks that are incredibly extended and incredibly active. So as you see here, during pandemics, Instagram, which is potentially something that should not really grow because it's based on experience and on places with people locked in. Yes, of course, you can put your images of when you do gym or you prepare your food, but in reality, it lacks what feeds its activity. So in reality, it has increased. And that was quite strange. We were wondering why, becoming the second social media, and Facebook declining continuously. Again, is that the users of Instagram are again the same people that were affected. So we're now looking at a particular controversial situation in which the ones that were affected are the ones that could be or are more active. So what we have done here was looking at what was happening during the lockdown on these particular platforms. What you see in the first image is a comparison of the interaction that we found in this particular place. So in terms of interaction, we took the most important node of that center and we found something which was unexpected. So the interaction in a place which is completely locked, Hendrik, a place which is completely locked is actually increasing. What that means? It means actually that there's something else happening and actually is a form of polarization. So the network that are existing continue operating in a place which is completely closed and there's only a... What is even more important is the fact that they are specifically place-based. And this specific space-based and situated form of representation that always rethink and reestablish that particular place of engagement, that's why that particular node is what is probably our most important finding. Indeed, when we compare to the other type of mode, the one I showed you, the old style, the closed one, what you see is that the other one is totally dying, is actually that particular form, as I was saying at the beginning, of creative distractions that is actually happening on the everyday. That's our reflection. I want to go further. I won't go further now, but I will possibly talk in the discussion. Thank you very much indeed.